Our guest today is Dan Toma. Dan is a three-time author, a Thinkers 50 management thinker to watch, a World Economic Forum contributor, and a strategic innovation advisor to many blue chip companies. His books, The Corporate Startup, Innovation Accounting, and his latest, Open Innovation Works, have won multiple international awards and are considered essential reading for anyone trying to build innovation as a repeatable discipline, not just a one-time moonshot. Dan, thanks for being with us today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you very much for having me on the show, guys.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's get it started off with something I hope you'll enjoy. And that's understanding strategy as a core concept to what Mike and I discuss here each week. In that vein, can you explain the concept of a cargo cult and why it's such an interesting case study for how companies approach innovation?
Yeah, the whole concept of cargo cults comes from an old book, and Michael, you might help me with the title, or you might help me with the publishing date, but God, it's probably 10, 15 years old book, something like that, and it's actually explaining how we as society create religions. So it's not a business book. It's a book that talks about religions, and apparently they researched some tribes, some native tribes in some on some islands in the Pacific,
Yeah.
and the story goes something along the lines of the war in the Pacific, Second World War in the Pacific. The US military needed some bases to resupply their troops that were fighting overseas against the Empire of Japan. And obviously, they found these islands. These people weren't necessarily, foreigners to the idea of white people and developments outside of their island, but they haven't actually interacted a lot with advanced civilizations over the past few hundred years. And when the U.S. military came, they set up outposts there, resupply bases. So these people were basically just seeing cargo planes landing, offloading broken tanks, broken jeeps, broken equipment, taking off. The following morning, an equal amount of tanks was arriving, fixed and ready to go to battle. Same for jeeps, same for any other equipment. Well, it was all great for them to see this, and at one point the war ended, and the U.S. no longer needed those islands. They pulled out. They moved their supplies somewhere else. Now, what's interesting is what's happening today. And by today, I actually mean now in 2020, 26, right? So it's not like what happened 50, 60 years ago. It's just what's happening now. Now, these people on these remote islands still go to these abandoned runways every day. They light up fires and they do these like landing signals with fires, hoping that the cargo planes will return and they will bring food, they will bring medicine, and they would continue doing that cycle. So, in essence, what this story is telling us is that sometimes we tend to replicate the gestures without actually understanding how things are being made. And if you translate this to innovation, if you translate this to growth, right, you tend to have this perspective in an established organization that, look, if we're just going to copy the way things happen in successful and growing companies over here, copy it one to one, we are miraculously going to become as successful with growth as they are. And I'm not trying to criticize people now, but I've heard one too many stories of, established organizations going to Sweden and study the Spotify way. And they go and do the Spotify training. I'm not saying that Spotify training and Spotify way of working doesn't work, because it does, but it works for the Spotify context. Try applying that into an established bank, into an established pharma company, an established, you know, energy company. That will fail. So you have to understand what are the principles behind the Spotify way, with air quotes. It doesn't have to be Spotify, and then replicate that in your environment rather than just copying it one to one and hoping that miraculously growth will happen and agility will happen.
Yeah, it reminds me of what people often term innovation theater,
Yeah.
right? So you go through the gestures of having a big pitch day or a prototype day, and the teams who are often corporate teams, they go up there and they give presentations, there's a pitch, and it's going through the motions. But there's often just no serious intention to actually test these ventures in the market and then scale them. They get coffee mugs, or as Steve Blank says, they have lanyards everywhere, right? And that's where the innovation dies. It dies at the pitch. And then I've seen companies that will actually judge the pitches by simply an applausometer. Like applause is validation for whether you should invest in this venture or not. Now, I'm not saying venture capital is much better. Sometimes people just invest on energy, right, or the charisma of the founder, and then you go, and that's probably why the base rates for failure and innovation are so high. I want to come to the title of your book. Is it a
Hmm.
statement or a question? Open innovation works, or open innovation works? I think we should probably start with what is open innovation,
Yeah, listen, we picked the title on purpose. I remember when I had my session with Diana and with Esther, the co-authors talking about the title. I think it can be interpreted in many ways. It can be works as in the factory, like the factory where you have open innovation
right?
happening. It can be a verb, right? Look, it works, or it can be a question. Does it actually
Yeah.
work? Obviously, I'll let the audience pick up the book, and they're going to be the judges of that. Um, what is open innovation? Well, there is a clear definition in the book, and I'm not going to cite from the book, but in my opinion, it's basically an innovation activity. Basically, you're creating something new, but you are creating it with an external partner, and you both benefit equally from that particular thing that you've created. And I think it's very important to make this distinction here because sometimes what I'm seeing in the work that we're doing at Outcome, I'm seeing that a lot of times people consider vendor management as open innovation, right? We
Right.
are we are going to do this POC with this startup and basically use their technology for free or for a very little amount of money. And obviously, the startup is interested because they want to associate with your big brand
It's a credibility play. Yeah.
for the startup, indeed. Um, and then the corporation calls it open innovation. Well, that's just vendor management. You're not doing
And this
any.
is some people call this venture clienting. Venture clienting ends up going in this direction quite fast. It's like putting a ribbon and a bow around what is actually just vendor management. Potential partners in the future where you do your POC, your experiments, and then perhaps there's a relationship that forms, and that's obviously beneficial for the startup, as you mentioned. But what else is there?
Mhm.
I mean, that's one option you might have is to
I mean, in the book, we're talking about six or seven various open innovation engines. We call them basically plays in open innovation. You can do venture clienting, right? Which is one as long as you do it properly. We're talking about corporate venture capital. We're talking about partnerships with universities. We're talking about incubators and accelerators. There's several engines, and the interesting thing about it is that they serve different purposes, and you need to pick the right one relative to your internal constraints in your organization, but also considering what you're trying to achieve with the open innovation play.
yeah. I talked to a professor at Stanford, I won't name his name, about open innovation. He was extremely cynical. And his statement was essentially, yeah, I don't believe in partnerships with externals. You can't even partner with your neighboring department in a corporate. How are you supposed to ever make that work? And I think what he was hinting at is the story you opened this with was the cargo cult, right? That often these external partnerships end up going through the gestures, holding the batons up with the light, right? But there's no actual impact. So if
Yeah.
you were going to, and you're the accounting guy for innovation, right? So if you were going to measure the impact of open innovation, what would your suggested metrics be?
Well, like with every other innovation, it should be ROI.
Okay.
Because if you're not measuring your activity on ROI or impact, right? Because it might just be, I don't know, you are the national health system of the UK.
Right.
You don't have ROI, but you have, for example, patient wait time, or you have
Correct.
other KPIs, right? So by ROI, I mean impact to a wider to
For
you know
for some
wider net.
customer segment, whether it's in a social enterprise or a private enterprise, right? Like
Yeah,
it
yeah,
has to
yeah.
actually create value for someone.
Exactly. It needs to create value. And this is why I'm using ROI, because it's, again, a term that everybody's familiar with. But and impact is a bit more fluffy, although more encompassing. So yeah, I would only measure that. Everything else is just fluff. And to what the professor mentioned about open innovation and him being cynical, I sign up for that. I
Yeah.
I. I'm not saying I don't believe in open innovation. I don't believe in the way we are doing open innovation these days.
Yeah.
What I'm seeing from my experience, and I'm happy to break some China on this podcast.
Go for it. Go for it.
What what I'm seeing here is that over the past few years, I mean, Michael, we go back like what, 10 years? We know
Yeah.
each other from like the beginnings of the lean startup movement.
We have lots and lots of scars to show for this. So if you hear a
Exactly,
little bit of
exactly.
cynicism over the next 40 minutes or so, that's where it's coming from.
Exactly, exactly, exactly. I mean, what happened? We created Lean Startup, and then the entire movement, and then we went into corporate innovation. And for about 10 years or so, these large organizations have tried to do internal innovation. Majority of them failed.
Yes.
Majority of them failed, and we can name names if we have to, but I'm sure that everybody that's listening to this probably knows of a story or knows somebody that has a story about how corporate innovation failed. And it failed for several reasons. I don't want to go into detail of that. Now, what are we seeing? We're seeing that basically large organizations over the past, I would say, couple of years, so probably starting 2023-ish, 2022, 2023, they've moved the focus from internal innovation to open innovation. They haven't fixed anything that was wrong with internal
Yeah.
innovation, and
Yeah.
they're not just doing open innovation hoping that they will succeed. Well, the writing is on the wall. They won't.
Yeah. So I think we have to actually address the issue then. So what is it that causes internal innovation to fail? And just go straight to the heart of it. I have my theory, as you know, what causes that. You have your theory. It's not one theory that explains it all. It's a grab bag, right? But maybe one or two bullet points. I'll have mine, and then we'll go to why would open innovation actually solve it?
The quote at the beginning of the Anna Karenina book from Tolstoy. It says that
Yeah.
every happy family, every all the happy families are the same. All unhappy families are unhappy in their own way.
Yes.
Uh,
I use this in my
translate,
book, right? I use it in my book,
right?
right?
Exactly, exactly,
Because
exactly. So
and the
translating.
point, yeah, the point is that yeah, all corporations, while they're going well, they probably don't need much innovation because the core business model is working well. It looks like they're innovative. Everything's going well. Google looks like Apple. Apple looks like Meta, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Everybody tries to benchmark them, as you mentioned. When the shit hits the fan, it's always for particular reasons. It's particular to a Spotify. It's particular
Mhm.
to an industrial company. It's particular to their business model. But there are, I believe,
Patterns.
overarching underlying reasons that go across all of those. What are
Yeah.
they? What are some of those
My
factors?
opinion is that if I look over the past, again, 10 years or so and my experience in the field, I would say one of the biggest failure was the inability of the organization to connect the strategic intent with the innovation activities, with the innovation
Yeah.
budget, with innovation cycles, with all of that. And BCG confirmed my opinion a couple of years back when they put out the research saying that only 12% of companies worldwide actually reported the connection between strategy and the innovation expenditure. So there is this huge disconnect, which obviously happens for several reasons, and in every organization is different. And then on top of that, we have poor governance, poor understanding of how we build and deliver strategy, lack of governance, lack of metrics. That's why I wrote the second book,
Yes.
Innovation Accounting, to
Yes.
address that. So I don't know. What's your take, Michael? What are your points?
No, I think when you first go into innovation in corporate, I think it's very much like cargo cult. You get into the gestures, like you think it's an Osterwalder campus, right? You get into debates about are you filling that thing out correctly, right? Then you move on to lean startup, which is a game changer. You actually are testing stuff in the market. But then you run into this question of, hey, what if we actually find a business? What happens? Then you run into the corporate budget cycle. There's no actual
Mhm.
budget for you if you want to scale that thing. Why is there no budget? Goes to what you're talking about. The reason there's no budget is because you're not in the strategy. You're not in the
Yep.
strategic plan. And if you happen to have a great idea in the middle of April and the next budget is available in January, you're kind of out of luck, right? So it's what you said. It's the corporate is optimized for performing to the P&L on steady rhythms, 1 year cycle, right? 5 year plans, the 5 year Soviet plan, as I like to joke. And then that's how they govern. That is optimizing an existing machine. It's not doing what you're talking about, which is changing the business model, doing something fundamentally new, testing it. And most corporate executives, you can't even blame them. They have no idea how to do that,
Yeah.
aside
Yeah.
from give me the 5 year plan and go execute, you know?
I mean, if we don't go and change budgeting, we can't do anything
Exactly.
in a large organization. And we're still, I mean, we can talk about the best governance structure and the best stage gates and the best product lifecycle or idea lifecycle, whatever you want to call it. Trust me, I've designed a lot of those and they were great
Yeah.
to the point where we were at the mercy of the annual cycle. So it we could only do metered funding to a certain extent in our innovation department, because then the entire metered funding structure was collapsing once we had to ask for a bigger budget. Because those annual cycles you're talking about are actually two annual cycles. So basically,
Yeah.
every 2 years you get budget, not
Yes.
every year.
Yes.
If you have a good idea this April, you're not going to get it on the budget for next year. You're probably going to get it in the budget for two
Yes.
years from
You
now.
need to already have started lobbying, right? And I guess to wrap
Exactly.
up this section of why corporate struggle is a very, you know, cynical take that it's just two different machines, right? They're just never going to make it. Like, that's
Yeah.
the way that it works. And the great hope of open innovation is like, well, we can't do it. So it's actually cynical if you think about it. Like we have abandoned hope of doing it internally because we can't do it. Let's just hope that these external people know how to do it, right? And there was even a
Yeah.
quote talking about what you're talking about from a president of a business unit somewhere in the world in a big corporation. He told me straightforward. He was at least honest. He said, Michael, if you want to build me an innovation program, I won't get the money. If you want to actually build business, I won't get the money. But if you frame it as this is an HR program to teach the culture of innovation, I'll get you all kinds of money.
Welcome to Innovation Theater.
Yeah. All right, Jason, bring us back on course.
Yeah. All right, Dan. You've written that without clear metrics, careers in innovation become cul-de-sacs. And that's a striking image. For the individual contributor, the analyst, product manager, or the sales guy, who don't have a budget or mandate, how do they make their innovation contribution visible in a company that doesn't have an innovation accounting system yet?
Yeah, well, my advice to them will be to write their CV and look for another job.
Fair enough.
Yep.
Seriously, I wrote a piece a few years back, probably one of the most popular pieces of content I've put out, and the title read something like "Why a Career in Innovation is a Bad Idea." It is a bad idea, and to the point of your question, uh, I mean, go ahead and play around, experiment, pretend that you're Steve Jobs, do all of that, enjoy your time. But as long as the organization is not able to address those critical questions I was just, discussing with Michael, it's going to be very tough for you. Now, if writing your CV is not what you want to do, right? Because of, personal reasons and motivation and all of that stuff, right? We all have, a mortgage and we have kids to send to school and all of that. The next best option would be to move closer to core, move closer to the core of the business. That's where you're going to see more support. So try to make sure that your innovation is not totally disruptive, and make sure that it's not going to cannibalize on the existing core, because you're going to be nobody's going to like you in that organization. So
Yeah.
stay closer to the core, go into play around in the adjacent space, and that will be one advice. And the other advice is understand that you have to play the political game. You have to be a diplomat above all else. It's great that you're a great product owner or a good marketeer, but you also need to know how to work the network to get what you want, get those resources. The resources will come slow, to the point that we made earlier. But it's better to have resources in 2 years than not to have any resources at all.
Yeah.
Michael, what do you think?
Well, I was going to say that's a bit fatalist, right? Because if I listen to you, it's all true what you're saying, the challenges of doing it. But I think what it implies is that actually organizational DNA can't be changed. So, Jason,
Hmm.
you worked in sales. I'm sure you've heard this. Let's say you sell hardware, and your idea is simply, hey, we could sell a subscription with this new software we developed internally along the way. Your hardware guys aren't going to do that. Your sales guys, they're just not going to do it because their incentive is not to do it. They don't, one, the subscription is a fraction normally of the hardware that they're selling. So they focus their attention on where they can get the biggest commission, of course, right? It's understandable. But if you ask them to even sell a subscription, they don't even know how, right? They've never really sold SaaS before. And so what it sounds like is it's basically impossible to change the business model's DNA. And if you have ideas around that, all of the, and what Dan, you're hinting at heavily, is the politics forms around that entrenched business model. And
Hmm.
that's the hard part. It's not that you couldn't change the business model or test it, it's just almost impossible to get the resources to do so. And I guess my last point there is, as a startup, you would dream to have the resources of a corporate. That's the whole goal, is to get the resources of a corporate. And the irony of corporate is that you have all those resources, but you can't access it. You cannot get it, right? For your experiments. Did you ever run into that, Jason?
Oh, where I couldn't get backing for anything that I had? Yeah, all the time. Nobody wants to back a idea that's not their own or coming from down to up. It's not really. It's a really tough battle. Any things that I have come up with that are programs. Basically, the only thing that I've been successful with are my own efficiency innovations. Beyond that, there's not a whole lot that you can do.
Well,
It's pretty tough.
why would you, if you're sitting in corporate, ever listen to your salespeople who interact with the actual customers? Why would you listen to them?
Oh,
What do
it
they know?
seems like a terrible idea.
What do they know?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, Michael and Jason, to this point, whenever we are asked to build strategy for our
Yeah.
clients, we specifically have a stage in the process where we interview people, and
Yeah.
we actually by design we put there people from customer support, from sales, people
Yes.
that read complaints every day. We want to interview them for strategy, and we make sure that whatever it is that they are saying, bubbles up to the executive level and say, well, according to your sales force or to your customer support force, this is what your customers are complaining. So maybe this is a good strategic
Yeah.
direction.
But you know the crazy thing about this? I always find this crazy. Any consultant worth their weight, what is the first thing they do when they want to assess what's going on in a corporate? They descend the corporate ladder down to the people in the field. Why do they do that? Because those people know what's going on. So the only question I ever have is like, why couldn't you just descend the corporate ladder yourself and talk to your own people? Instead, you have to pay BCG or Bain or McKinsey millions of dollars to talk to your own people, right?
Or outcome,
It's
or outcome.
or outcome. Preferably you go to outcome because you'll get an outcome, right? You'll actually meet one of these innovation metrics that Dan likes to talk about.
Well, there's a reason why they do that, Michael. To be honest with you, first of all, nobody's profit in their own land, right?
Yeah.
I was on customer engagements where we basically were working with the strategy leader or with the growth leader, and basically they gave us the brief for the board meeting. We actually haven't added one single word to that,
Yes.
and we agreed with it. We agreed. We read it and we agreed. It's like, oh, that's smart. You said that? Yeah, I said that. Well, why aren't you, in this case, presenting yourself in front of the board? Like, they won't listen to me. That's what they said. Like, okay, well, they're
No,
going to listen to you
it's
then.
it's a real thing. I wrote about in my book, right, that that's why people would go to the Oracle at Delphi, right? So
Hmm.
you get cover for political decisions you've already made anyway. Um, and I have a friend who works at a massive corporation, or he did in the past, a separate one. They paid McKinsey 4 million to just present the presentation they already made,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
And so I think people that really goes back to your point is that the politics are so strong that even when you know the answer and it's basically correct, even when a Dan comes in and says, "You got it, you nailed it,"
yeah.
you won't be listened
Also,
to
it's
unless
a,
it comes from the external.
also sometimes it's a question of psychological safety. So you might have a CEO wanting to speak with a junior sales rep or somebody in
Yeah,
customer support, and that person will not necessarily be honest with the
they're
CEO
afraid. They're afraid.
because of the imbalance of authority and power. But if they speak with me or with my colleagues, they will not self-censor, and they can tell us everything. And then it's going to be on to us to bring it to the CEO. And trust me, we have really thick skin. I mean, and we can definitely bring it up. So it's also that psychological play we need to consider, not just bashing away the corporate
No, it's
culture.
totally true. So there's a rational reason that people at the bottom don't expose all the faults of the company. And sometimes that goes overboard and turns just into a complaining struggle session, right? And
Hmm.
that
Hmm.
also doesn't help, to be fair, on the other
Yeah,
side.
that's why we have very clear scripts and we stay on script.
Unlike us, Jason, what's up next?
Dan, you actually started with a degree in engineering before you pivoted
Yeah.
to entrepreneurship and then into the corporate innovation world. How did that engineering mind shape the way you think about innovation systems? Do you think the way an engineer would approach a problem is fundamentally different from how a business school graduate might?
Yeah, I have an engineering degree, electronics and telecom, and I also have an MBA. So I've seen both words for better or worse. The engineer in me says that for every single problem that we
Welcome.
are facing, there is an underlying system issue that we haven't
Yes.
addressed.
Yeah.
So it's always the system, it's never the individual that is to blame.
By the way,
I'm not
that's
sure
not wrong. That's actually a very healthy way to look at a corporate organization. It's not a physical machine. it's a social machine, it's a social system, right?
I'm not sure what would be the MBA take on this, and obviously, if listeners here are happy to chip in with their comments, I'll be more than happy to read what would be the MBA take on that. As I said, I also have an MBA degree, but doesn't mean that this totally washed over my
Mm,
engineering background. Also, from an engineering perspective, and I think this is probably the mistake that a lot of engineers make, and I find myself doing the same mistake. We're looking for patterns, and we're trying to see everything in patterns, and we're looking for those patterns, and we're looking to justify our emotions at the end of the day with numbers.
yes.
And the more solid we think the numbers are, the more we believe our emotions to be correct.
So
Obviously, these
just like ChatGPT, you may find patterns that are hallucinations in the end
yeah,
that
yeah.
don't actually
So
exist. Yeah.
I know that sometimes even spending too much time on looking for the pattern is the wrong thing to do.
Yeah. Let me go into the MBA thing. I'll do it very quickly.
Here you go.
One of the issues I think with the MBA is not looking at things as systems. And if you just look at the curriculum, it starts with you have your siloed marketing class, you have your siloed accounting class, your siloed finance class. You're basically mapping out the corporate departments that you're going to go work for. And then the question you would have, though, after you do all that, is how do they all fit together? And I simply don't remember, maybe it exists today, any class that ever put that whole business model strategy back together, pieced it back together. And when you get hired, and this is a great irony, I think, you get hired into corporate in a highly specialist role in an accounting department or a sales department. You're just the sales guy, Jason, by the way, just the sales
Right.
guy. Yeah. My question is, as they go up, when does the specialist become that generalist manager? Who trained them? You know, how
Hmm.
is that supposed to happen? How are you supposed to go from you worked on the chassis the whole time to now you're doing the whole car, if you get my point? And I just don't know that we're teaching that well in education in general, but in MBAs especially. Any thoughts there? Or am I characterizing it too brutally?
Um, no, I agree with that. I agree with that. Nothing.
Good.
Well, Dan, I didn't mention this at the top, and I should have, but you're CEO of Outcome and also co founder of that business consulting firm. Tell us a little bit about your day to day and what Outcome's goals are.
Yeah, what we're trying to do with outcome, and probably now it's obvious, for the listeners. We're trying to add pragmatism to growth. So we're coming into a business, and we're really focusing on growth, innovation-led growth to some extent, but not only. This is, to the point earlier, we're working with CVCs, we're working in M&A. So we're doing a lot of growth-related work, but we're trying to add pragmatism to growth, and we're trying to um, make sure that we never lose focus of what we're trying to achieve. We never get bogged down into the details of the work and forget about what we're trying to achieve. This is why the
Wh-
name outcome,
Which is, as you said earlier, must be ROI.
which must be ROI or impact, right? To a certain extent.
Yeah.
We've been on projects even for prof or for-profit organizations where by design the project that we were in wasn't ROI in the sense of top line growth. They had to achieve other things like employee engagement or entering a new market, although entering that market would have come at a cost. Just being there and achieving a certain market presence was considered impact. So yeah, that's what we're doing. That's what we stand for. Obviously, a lot of analytics involved. A lot of the stuff that I wrote about in innovation accounting, we actually live by it. Right, we're looking at those KPIs. We're looking at KPIs such as, cost of failure, new product vitality index, all the KPIs that makes sense to implement whenever you're trying to grow.
You know, one of the criticisms I have of our own people in innovation is it's often you blame the corporation, you go into this spiral of just, yeah, corporate will never work, etc. But we often just don't speak the language of the
Mhm.
CFO, for example.
Yeah.
And in my experience, it's not that the CFO can't understand the metrics like you're developing, ones that actually matter. It's just that they don't know them.
Yeah.
They're used to core business metrics, and you're coming in saying, hey, actually, you could measure the impact of innovation. They're just different metrics. Can you give the listeners some idea of what kind of metrics you might look at? You talked about cost of failure. I know you're big on like learning velocity is another one,
Mhm.
and how you might measure
Yeah.
some of those things.
So, in my opinion, one of the most critical KPIs actually, there's two critical KPIs for leaders to understand is new product vitality index. So basically, what percentage of your current revenue comes from products you
Yeah.
didn't have in your portfolio, let's say 3 or 5 years ago? Because
Yes.
this is telling you if the money that you're spending on growth, regardless if it's internal, open innovation, internal innovation, M&A, whatever it doesn't matter. Like money that you're spending to create top line growth, it's actually amounting to something. And this is where NPVI is critical.
And you're not talking about R&D spend because a lot of people would jump straight to that. Well, we're already spending money on R&D. You're saying the following. But although R&D is a spend, what's the conversion to actual cash? And
Exactly, exactly.
often companies don't know. They
Yeah,
just
yeah,
assume there's a connection between R&D spend and incremental revenue.
yeah, yeah. This is why it's very important for them to understand how many dollars of past revenue they are spending from every dollar of new revenue. So let's say
Yeah.
we've been running our core business for 100 years, and every single year we're putting $10 away from that old business towards the next gen thing.
Yeah.
Well, in 5 years from now, how much of our revenue comes from that next gen thing, and how much of the old dollars have we spent for the new dollars? So that's one, and the other critical, in my opinion, KPI is cost of failure. How much are we paying on average for every failed initiative?
That's a
And
proxy
obviously,
for learning, isn't it, in the
it's
end?
a proxy for learning, but it's a proxy for many other things. It's a proxy for how good your culture is.
Yeah.
It's a proxy for how good your governance is, right? If you
Yes.
have poor governance, your cost of failure is going to be massive. If you have a terrible culture where we can't speak truth to power, we're going to be pushing projects,
With
along.
no validation, just cash burners, right?
Exactly, exactly, exactly. We're just going to be pushing those projects along. And then at one point, obviously, no amount of PowerPoints internally will change the opinion of the client externally, right? I can have the best PowerPoint internally and show you how great this product is. But at the end of the day, the person that decides on how good my product is not going to be my boss, it's not going to be my boss's boss or the board of the company. It's going to be the customer that is paying for that.
Yeah, that's
And
strange.
if
That's strange, isn't it?
that's strange, right? Right? Who'd have thought? Well, right? And
Hey,
this is again something that we typically work with boards on our projects to explain and to have them understand. Also, given where society is these days, cost of failure is extremely important because it shifts mindset from
that's right.
trying to pick the winners to try to have a portfolio view and try out different things very, very fast. And through cost of failure, you can actually measure how many things you're trying out. And not just that, but make sure that the budget that you have is distributed evenly across multiple bets.
Yeah. Hey, and I've seen that as actually one of the things, this cost of failure, not just cost of failure. When you teach people the base rates for failure for this type of innovation you're talking about, it's, I mean, you can look at the statistics, it's around 90%, but somewhere between 60 and 95-ish percent of these new bets fail. That by itself, once you make it obvious to people, is an unlock for psychological safety. Because
Hmm.
one of the big problems in corporate is when you place a bet, there's an assumption, there's a 100% chance of success. And the only reason it wouldn't succeed is because your execution is terrible. Right? So I think this cost of failure is a great way, and educating people on the actual failure rates is a great way to unlock just a different culture of testing things because it's not your fault when it fails. Mostly it's what you said, the customer just doesn't want it, the trends aren't in your favor, etc. So speaking of trends, is we have to get to this. There's a lot of talk about AI. And if you remember not too long ago, it was IoT. And then corporates were coming out saying we're going to do a digital transformation. And now they're going to say we're doing AI. And there's a lot of hype in different directions. You're sitting in Europe where it's, I would say, a little bit more of a pessimistic direction, more of a doomerism, but you can correct me. And in the US, it's just absolute AI psychosis, right? Like every day there's a launch of something. Oh my God, this is going to destroy the whole SaaS business model. This industry is cooked. Yeah, this is very American, right? Bravado, jump to this is going to change the whole world. It's a game changer without any proof, right? It's just, psychosis, I would say, or hype. You're deep in the trenches. Is AI a thing in corporate yet or not? Because this is hard for me to determine between what's just the hype, the talk, and what's the actual lay of the land on the ground. And then what's your actual opinion on AI? And you can say what, LLMs, vision, whatever. Will it have any impact in the short term or not? Beyond hype.
Well, I'm gonna, you know, switch on my engineer brain again, and you know, come up with the stats. 90% of AA projects
That's
fail
the
to return
MIT one,
ROI.
right? That's the
That's the
MIT.
MIT. That's the MIT research that came out, I think, in October last year. So it's pretty new.
And it could be worse because that's reported failures,
Yeah, yeah.
right?
Exactly. It can be close to 99.999%
Yes.
of
Yeah.
projects,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
Again, going back to the conversation of cost of failure, a lot of my clients are interested in applying cost of failure, and I say, well, first and foremost, we need to define what failure means, and we need to
Yeah.
live by that. And then obviously a lot of people start pushing back. Yeah, but it was not a failure because we learned so much, and the learnings go back into better products next year or in 2 years' time. Yeah, but still, that particular initiative that we put 500,000 towards,
No
went
ROI.
tits up.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Which
right?
is a good thing, by the way. It's a good thing if
It's
you
a good
stop it on
thing.
time.
It's a good thing, but we have to admit our wrongdoings, and obviously, if we get learnings out of it, that's even better. Going back to AI, so there's definitely hype, and obviously, if you look now at corporate budget, everything has to go towards AI, from trainings to product implementations to everything. Like you can no longer get a training across HR if it's not branded with AI
Yeah.
training for whatever, right?
Yeah.
Um, which makes sense, right? Which I'm not criticizing. I think it makes sense, but it's
There are good
definitely
applications for sure.
definitely again 90% of projects fail, and they fail because again we haven't addressed the critical issues. We've been talking about design thinking and lean startup and experiments and experiment driven innovation and hypothesis driven development for I would say 20 years now, right? Design
Yeah.
thinking it's been around for more than 20 years. How many of those AI projects actually start by understanding the problem
Right.
and interviewing the people that have that problem?
And by the way, that's the great opportunity, I think, with AI. I think a lot of engineers, correct me, I don't want to typecast you completely. They have a deep belief in if I build the right thing, the market will be there because it's going to be so much quality and it's going to solve the problem so well. But I think we've learned also over the last 20, 30 years that that's just not true because it's dependent on getting the problem definition of the customer correct. And
Mhm.
often you do 2 years, 3 months. a year of development just to find out nobody wants this thing. And that's hard to
Yeah.
internalize. It's a difficult thing to actually have to admit, but most engineers learn it if they've done it. It's not hard to learn. Basically, you don't plan a wedding if there's no spouse on the other side, right? So the great hope for AI, I think, is it can speed up that realization. You don't
Yeah.
need to spend a year developing something. You can vibe code it, get it out the door, and at least get that early feedback much faster than you ever could have before. Are
Yeah.
you seeing
Yeah.
people employing that or not in corporate? Or are they still doing the old thing of let's make it perfect first, then test it?
I I think we're still there, unfortunately. I think the whole practice of design thinking and lean startup to some extent hasn't yet matured, or at least the people that are now in charge of AI are oblivious to what we've been writing about in the lean startup community for the past 15 years.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I mean, the tenure of people in innovation is 4 years, so I'm not surprised that that's the case. Uh, we just have to go back to understanding basic business or basic innovation logic. Try to identify the problem, build small scale from there. Obviously, there's other issues around, data optimism. All these organizations believe that they have amazing data or a lot of data, and that data is of high quality. And then whenever they implement projects, they realize that the data is just not there. It was crappy to begin with. And obviously it's crap in, crap out. The AI is not
Yeah.
going to make
But
up data
that
out
in
of
my
thin air.
experience relates to the main thing you pointed out is if you don't craft your strategy well, then you don't know what data to even get. And the
Hmm.
belief that if you just made all data transparent, you could make better strategic decisions. I don't think that's true because it depends on having the actual strategy in place, the hypothesis for it, before you even
Yeah.
get the data to know how to interpret it. Um, Jason, take us home. I know we have another question related to Dan.
Well, we're kind of running out of time here. So, Dan, I just want to kind of open the floor for you for here a minute. Where can we find your book? Where can we find you?
Yeah.
Yeah, listen, the books are on Amazon. If you type in the corporate startup or innovation accounting or the last one, Open Innovation Works, you can find them in your local Amazon. Um, if you have issues with delivery times, don't take it up with me. We have publishers and they're in charge of that.
It's the Strait of Hormuz, man. It's the Strait
Yeah,
of
exactly.
Hormuz.
Exactly.
Your
Blame
books are
it
tied up in the Strait of Hormuz.
blame it on that. Obviously, drop me a line. We might be able to help you, get book from a different country, or I might just send you a digital copy if you ask nicely. Um, that's one, and obviously you can find me on LinkedIn. I'm posting quite frequently there. If you want to get in touch, that's the best channel. And in general, you can probably find me at conferences. I'm trying to stay away from pure innovation conferences, so you can find me at industry conferences. I'm, for
Back
example,
to the pragmatism. That's the
back to
pragmatism.
pragmatism. Yeah, I know. I love innovation conferences. I love the innovation group, but to be honest with you, it's still a lot of theater going on, unfortunately. And now
Yeah.
with open innovation, it's even more theater and less accountability. Um, I'm going there to try to change, how things are and change the mindset. But I much rather be closer to a CFO talking about the go-to-market strategy for their new payment app or for their new drug or for their new digital therapeutic app. And use all of our innovation expertise and all of our innovation processes to solve a critical business issue.
Today and not 10 years down the road when the CVC fund returns, right?
Exactly,
Yeah.
All right.
Very
exactly.
good. Very cool.
Good deal. Dan, thanks for joining us here today on Show Your Priors. We really appreciate it. I'll leave a link to your LinkedIn in the description of our videos. We really appreciate it. We'd love to have you back on sometime.
Thank you very much, Jason.
All right. Hey, you've just watched a clip from Show Your Priors podcast. Check out our main channel for full episodes. We have a new one every Tuesday. If you liked what you saw, give us a like and subscribe. It's free for you and helps us out a ton. Did we miss something during our discussions? Let us know in the comments below. Thanks, and we'll see you on the next one.